Okay. Cool. Two things in this speech. Firstly, on principle, and secondly, on why this is bad for Trump's election. So firstly, on principle, we tell you that this crime is just likely to be quite significant for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because it involves just the transparency of campaign contributions, which means that he did things like hiding funding and redirecting it towards his own personal interests, which is particularly important to the American public. But secondly, because it involves the hiding of information that is likely to influence the outcome of election, notably the extramarital affair with the porn star. But also, like, the impact of this is that America is quite a conservative context where things like cheating on your wife is just seen as quite a large scandal. Other kind of how badly America took other kinds of like sexual-related things. See like Bill Clinton. In the early 2000s. So why is this important? Firstly, we say it's just important because he committed a crime, and principally any other citizen who committed the same crime would be charged and tried in a court, and therefore, like any other citizen, regardless of who he is, he should be held to those same standards. But also, we say that this like sets a good precedent in the future because holding people who were presidents previously just accountable for their crimes and accountable for those kind of things, which means that like future courts are more likely to be able to hold these people accountable, and less afraid of less afraid of holding trials, and that is particularly important, notably because anyone else would be held accountable for these kind of things, and just principally that is more democratic and also better. But then why does this matter for the debate specifically? For a couple of reasons. Firstly, we say this just like distinguishes the trial from a political assassination, because one, there was just substantial evidence that held him to this, but secondly because it just was proven in court, and even if the judge was a Democrat, the judiciary was fair, and the jury was fair, and they made this call in the first place. But we say that if this sets a precedent, is likely to be used in good ways, because this is the court system. Notably, the American public trusts the court system just in general, because it needs to be proven to an significant extent, and just like believed by the jury in the first place. So even if like the judge is sus, it's like not that bad. Second of all, just onto some practical things about why this is just particularly bad for Trump's election. We tell you this is true for three reasons. Firstly, because it just simply occupied time, in the sense that he was mandated, while the trial went on, he was mandated to spend like 12 weeks in New York in court. He got like really fined for not, and he like violated a gag order, which was like restricted on him. So we tell you that all of these restrictions meant that was just like time he couldn't spend on his campaign, time he couldn't spend attending things like rallies, time he couldn't spend going to different states and campaigning there, time he couldn't spend invigorating his base. Note that this is where he does most of the fear mongering that Aff wants to talk about, in the sense that we prevent more of this fear mongering because he's just not able to go out and do this thing, and go out and do this kind of stuff, and that is particularly important in that we co-opt that benefit if they want to claim it, mainly because he's strongest when he's among the people and he is talking to them and rallying them together. But note also that this time is only going to last longer if he appeals, which we tell you he intends to do, and that is even more time that he cannot be working on his campaign. Second reason why this is just bad for Trump's election is just that firstly he looks more morally bankrupt because it's just proliferated around to everyone. Notably, this trial received like a decent amount of press and a decent amount of just like that sort of stuff. So it proliferated like his conviction that he had an extramarital affair with a porn star. And why is this significant? We tell you this is particularly significant because a lot of Americans just like kind of prescribe to respectability politics, in that what this looks like is that you just want a politician who is like a fair and kind, like a nice person, someone that your kids can look up to, someone who is just like seen as a legitimate figure in public, not someone who like, I don't know, goes and fucks a porn star, I suppose. And we tell you that this is specifically important, and an important kind of ideology in swing states such as like Arizona and Pennsylvania, when people are particularly socially conservative, and they believe in things like Baptist Christianity, which holds marriage to quite a high regard, and is particularly important in these kind of states. So it's likely to influence voting patterns and how people view like elections when when they occur. But also we say that like, so note the comparative here, which is just in the counterfactual, we tell you this is just like unlikely to come up, in that if you didn't get convicted, all of these charges were just unlikely to come up in these states, because firstly, they're just not really, they just haven't really been proven. So it's just particularly unlikely that these states would like bring them up in the first place, and it's just seen as like random stories that people tell, kind of, and just like dismissed on those grounds. But secondly, we say it's just more likely to be forgotten because there isn't a big reason to talk about it, because it is not concrete and not convicted in those kind of ways. The third reason why it's bad for Trump's election is it just makes Trump seem more corrupt, in that Trump had a lot of cases where it was just quite difficult to prove where he was actively corrupt or whether he'd actively committed certain crimes. For example, like his Russian interference in the 2016 election, these were all speculative, and he was not convicted. But we tell you that because he's been found guilty and because he's been charged guilty in these sort of instances, then this creates a perception of guilt, which is just like the president is a convicted felon, what else could he have done? Maybe these other kind of charges and other things are more likely to be true. But notably, this is more likely to be true in a society where like that just like stigmatizes felons in the first place. So they're more likely to, means that it's more likely to make his corruption just like seem more likely and seem particularly bad. What is the impact of this? We tell you a couple of things. Firstly, we say that if Affirmative wants to Affirmative's push on that, like, some people are just likely to be more radicalized. We tell you these people are probably likely to be radicalized symmetrically, in the sense that if they're charged by victim narratives, Trump has been perpetuating these victim narratives since like the beginning of his case. I'll go into a little bit more about it later, which is just he's already lost and these people are already radicalized in the first place. But we say that this radicalization is actually pretty bad for Trump, because we tell you that like the general Republican voter base just becomes more against Trump because they look worse. We tell you because of these kind of narratives of like purity and like marriage, etc. So you as a voter don't want to look that extreme and that bad, which means it's particularly bad for you. But also we say that like kind of these old school kind of politicians and people who believe in old school narratives of like respectable, sensible politicians feel more out of touch with politics as it exists, which means that they're less likely to do things like turn out to vote. They're also less likely, like if these people are politicians, they're also less likely to support Trump and less likely to support his kind of policies in Parliament in the first place, because they just see him as an illegitimate politician. So who does this actually end up affecting? We tell you that this ends up affecting swing voters, and for a couple of reasons that are unique to our side. Firstly, because of the publicity and the press in this event, you just get more people who are likely to go out to polls and be mobilized by this kind of event. Noting that this is not symmetric, the counterfactual is that this doesn't occur in the first place. But we say that these people are likely to care, but also we tell you that people who would never vote and don't really care about politics are now mobilized to do that, and that is unique to our side. But also that there are like a couple of reasons where the average person, even if they don't care, are just unlikely to, just generally probably, if you're like not particularly politically literate, you're probably likely to trust the court system and not be like super into the thing where you hear about all the legitimate legal questions that might exist potentially. It's just unclear why you do this. We say it's more likely that on our side, you just like hate Trump for like more moral and ethic reasons, in the sense that he cheated on his wife, but also it's just more closer to home. Things like marriage and loyalty are quite like large higher order concepts that people tend to relate with. But we also just say that like most Americans aren't fans of porn stars. That's not a good thing to end on.
Trump won the 2016 election when it was not a referendum on him or his character, it was a referendum on Hillary Clinton. Trump will win the 2024 election if it is a referendum on Joe Biden, Joe Biden's character and Joe Biden's policy. The way Trump succeeds is by being on the attack, focusing on his personal failures, his corruption, and his inadequacy for the presidency is the only effective strategy to deal with Trump's capacity to take over and to win elections. I'm going to answer two questions in this speech. Firstly, how will this impact the election? And secondly, why should we care about the principle of accountability? Firstly, on the election, I'll address this in two parts. First, why does this make swing voters more less likely to be in favor of Trump. What does this team say? The first thing they say is that this is a fraudulent and uncredible case that swing voters are likely to believe is corrupt. The first thing I want to do is just establish a series of reasons why I think the specific crime that Trump is charged with is a believable one that people are unlikely or don't perceive as being politically targeted. The first is the knowledge of this crime is not something that comes as a total surprise to the American people. Having an affair with Stormy Daniels was something that came out during his presidency. The accusation existed prior to the decision to go to trial, and obviously people had kind of forgotten about it, but it's still present in people's minds. This is a believable claim that has existed for a while, that has at various points been somewhat admitted to by Trump, that seems fairly in line with his character and a plausible thing that he would do, which means it's unclear why this is perceived as something that Joe Biden pulls out of thin air to take down Trump and prevent him from running the election. Secondly, the crime he's being accused of is fairly black and white. It's a financial crime with a financial paper trail. Several witnesses have testified to the fact that this occurred. There is a fairly extensive story by Stormy Daniels to explain the circumstance, how it occurred, and how it happened, which means that it's unclear, even if he appealed, why that appeal would be successful. And a second conclusion from a second jury that Trump committed this crime is only more likely to make that case more credible. And this team can't explain why that other jury would suddenly come to a different decision than the first one. But thirdly, because that decision was not made by a single judge, it was made unanimously by a jury with in a criminal court where the burden of proof was beyond reasonable doubt. It's unlikely, I think, that people challenge such a decision in a country that so strongly believes in the convictions of its courts, that believes in its justice system, that has notoriously been in favor of increasing the power of that judiciary. All of that suggests to me that for this set of swing voters, it's so implausible that they see this as purely political corruption. Perhaps this claim from this team would be believable if we're talking about Trump's already radicalized voters who already believe the election was stolen. But what I need to ask this team is, why is this a tipping point? Why, for these voters who haven't believed any of Trump's other conspiracies, who don't believe that Joe Biden stole the election, otherwise they'd be voting for Trump already, why is this the thing that suddenly convinces them that Joe Biden is evil and corrupt and the Democrats want to ruin the next election? I find that implausible. Even then, at the end of that, if you believe this is seen as partially corrupt or potentially corrupt by people who are swing voters, what does it need to be weighed against? Firstly, Trump has been in court under a gag order, unable to speak and unable to leave that courtroom for 12 weeks, something that will only continue if, as this team acknowledges, Trump continues to launch appeals into the future. Secondly, it popularized and made more legitimate the fact he had an extramarital affair with a porn star, which, yes, in a country as culturally conservative as America, is something people care about, in a country where people expect their president to be a person their children can look up to and aspire to be like. That is something people care about. But thirdly, made him seem corrupt and like a felon. Why are these things tipping points in ways that other questions in this debate are not? Firstly, because Trump, I think, has fairly successfully in the last 4 years distanced himself from the scandals of 2016. The fact he was president for 4 years gave him the legitimacy to move away from the scandals of his personal life preceding that presidency. And for this election, he has substantially refocused it towards the character failings of Joe Biden, the fact that he is old, the fact that he appears to have dementia. This team says in 2016, Trump said that he could grab women by the pussy and still manage to win. But the problem is, Trump didn't win the 2020 election focused on him. He loses elections when he is the target question of that election. And we think this is what refocuses people back to remembering that Trump, as well as Joe Biden, has character flaws and is imperfect. But the second way this is a tipping point is, I think, unlike many of those other criticisms, this is something that is far more black and white and less conspiratorial. Because claims like Russian interference in the 2016 election, or that he colluded with foreign agents, are kind of skeptical and difficult to believe. But the fact that Trump had an affair with against his wife with a porn star in Florida, it is the most in line with Trump's character and proven now in a court of law, which makes it believable and tangible in a way that other critiques of Trump's character are not. And in a Christian country, that matters a lot. They say these voters care about policy. Well, firstly, if they did, I doubt they would be voting for Trump. They say Joe Biden has done nothing. The Build Back Better bill was one of the largest investments in American infrastructure in its history since the end of the Great Depression. The Inflation Reduction Act was a monumental piece of legislation. Anyone who cares about their likelihood to get a job in the future is not going to vote for the president with the lowest rate of gaining jobs in like the last 4 presidencies and a history of economic failure. But secondly, if this is true, I don't think it gets them anywhere. It just symmetricize the whole debate, because people don't care about the trial either. They just care about the individual policies that have been written. So I don't understand the productivity of this argument. At the end of that, you need to ask yourself a very simple question. Close your eyes, picture an old person in Pennsylvania who's undecided between Trump and Joe Biden. What are they more likely to believe? That a criminal court, 12 jurors, were all paid off and found Trump guilty just because they wanted Joe Biden to win the next election? Or do they believe that Trump had an affair with his wife, with Stormy Daniels, a porn star, and that person is unfit to lead a country like America, is unfit to be someone their children aspire to be? That is an easy question to answer. People see this trial and they dislike Trump for it. They move further towards Joe Biden. That is a good thing. The next set of voters we should talk about are more radicalized or polarized voters. A few observations about this. Firstly, to the extent it radicalizes Trump's base, I would point this goes both ways, which is to say, it also invigorates the Democrats. This team says it makes Democrats complacent, but simultaneously they argue that this makes Trump's voters more radical and more passionate. And I don't understand why radical Democrats who believe strongly in stopping Trump from getting the presidency, when they see that, react by thinking, oh, the public's decided because a criminal conviction happened, we don't need to do anything. I think the far more plausible reaction is they see someone now who is a convicted felon, a threat to democracy, are more invigorated to prevent that person from becoming the leader. And that's particularly important in the context of right now, where many radical Democrats are unpersuaded by the idea that they should fight for Joe Biden because they perceive his failings in Israel to be a failing of being a left-wing leader, and therefore perceive there to be no reason to be an ardent supporter of the Democrats right now. This presents a present threat towards democracy, towards the potential for left-wing change in the future for these individuals who otherwise, in the counterfactual, end up being substantially more apathetic. I think this is a groundbreaking change in the way that people perceive the next election. But secondly, we already observed to no response from this team that Trump's base becoming more radical is bad for him. That the more radical MAGA Republicans get, the more conspiratorial they appear. The more rusted on Republican voters, the ones who remember John McCain's election campaign, who remember what the Republican Party used to be like, feel out of touch with what the Republican GOP is today. The more that older Republican leaders and leaders of the establishment feel like they should not ardently support Trump because they believe that Trump is a threat to the future trajectory and the future legitimacy of their party as a viable alternative to the Democrats. This is bad for Trump. But even if you don't believe that, this team does not explain at any point, and they can't at third, why Trump winning would be good or bad. They assume that we'll accept it, and we didn't. So you can't really answer that question. And what you should believe is the unresponded to analysis about accountability, about the precedent this sets. If you don't believe that Trump is bad, I think you should vote for us, the side that actually holds people to justice.
First on polarization, then on elections, and then on principle. I'm going to start with polarization because the truthful empirical reality is Trump is likely to win the election. The OIB knows he's leading polls. The OIB knows he got hundreds of $millions in donations, 60% of them from first-time donors. I think the reason why this is important is this shows why there are harms, regardless of whether Trump wins or loses, very certain harms that carry a lot of weight in the debate. What do we tell you at second when we bring this claim to no response from the second negative speaker? We tell you that a bunch of bipartisan policy in the House that is good, such as aid to Gaza, such as aid to Ukraine, are now impeded because Republicans have backlash. We tell you that Republicans have backlash already, just empirically. Let's say Mitt Romney says this is an attack on democracy. Republicans in the House say it's an attack on democracy. If you want structural reasons, we also give you them. We tell you that there's public pressure in swing states that are Republican for the Republican member of Parliament to support Trump. Secondly, we tell you that there's Trump loyalists in parliaments. And thirdly, we just tell you there's direct pressure from Trump there. What that shows is in either world, regardless of whether Trump wins or loses, or in the world where you believe Trump wins on both sides, we just get less bipartisan policy. This was good policy. This was policy that saved lives. This policy that helped wars be defended. That was particularly a good thing there. I think that already wins us the debate. The second thing I want to talk about is who has a more likely chance of Trump winning the election. This team gives you a couple of claims. The first thing, the claim that they rely on the most is that Trump seems corrupt, and this will mean that the American voters will vote against him. Various problems with this argument. First thing we explain is that the actual charge just is not seen as that corrupt. It is mismanaging of financial resources, something that Democrats have done historically, something that Republicans have done historically. Unclear that people actually care about that, especially when they're weighing that against their proximate needs, such as why is inflation so high? Why is America helping bomb children in Gaza? I think it's not particularly a voting issue. The second thing is, we give you a whole bunch of reasons at Zarah as to why people see this as a legitimate legal case that has legal questions. And they try to overcome this claim at Aryana by saying that the average voter won't vote on this spec knowledge. But I think the issue is the average swing voter, because it's an opt-in democracy, is just politically informed and probably is just looking at this issue. What do we explain here? Firstly, we tell you the judge was a Democrat. Secondly, importantly, to no response, we tell you that this crime was convicted in New York City, a 90% Democrat zone, and one that crucially represents the urban-rural divide. The reason why this is important is where Biden is losing votes is in rural America, and these are where the swing voters happen, and they don't believe New York peers are representative of themselves, so they cast especially doubt on the situation, and Trump is able to especially campaign in these areas there, which means that these were the swing voters that were tipping whether Biden wins or whether Trump wins, because they were rural America, the place that Biden won from Trump in 2020. These are the people that can go back to Trump pretty badly there because there's no representative there. But then secondly, we just tell you that things such as jury instructions by the judge were unclear. There's legal question about whether the judge did give them bad instructions by saying that you have to find him guilty of using finance to submit a supposed crime, but you don't have to be unanimous as to what that crime is. Is that people raise legal questions about that? There's legal, people definitely internalize this as being somewhat dodgy, so it's people likely that people question this and they see this as a political witch hunt and they see it as something that is politically bad there. And I think the important bit of weighing here is that I think the people who think that Trump is a criminal and corrupt have probably already decided that based on the other amounts of knowledge we have, such as him calling Zelensky, such as him being impeached and stuff like that. So I think it's unclear this is going to be a reason for you to vote. It's likely that there are already Democrats here. But the second bit of weighing here is they see that this isn't an election on whether Trump is a criminal because the court's done that. The court has already convicted Trump. They don't see them as having to vote out Trump with their own vote since the legal system has done that there. Weigh that against the voters that we tell you, which has seen a legal system that has actively failed and a legal system where their vote is the difference, because in their side, whether Trump is a criminal decided by the court, it's already a criminal, no need to vote. On our side, when the courts are corrupt, that clearly provides you an incentive to vote, that clearly provides you a reason to vote there. So the end of this point about corruption, we tell you that it was more skeptical whether the claims against whether Trump's claims that he's used such as witch hunts were actually the case and whether the state was trying to get him. This case validated those ones. The things that they talk about, corruption, were things that people were already certain about, unclear that was going to swing in either way there. Next thing that they try to tell you is that Trump is morally bankrupt, and this is going to mean that like white old people don't like him, right? So, three issues with this. I think first thing we just explained to you, there's no delta here. Trump has already said very bad things. He literally was involved with Playboy, right? So I think people already see him as morally bad. And I would just say in the counterfactual, in lieu of this trial, it's just likely Biden points this out or people point this out in debates. Unclear this is actually new information here. But secondly, I think just people who are probably morally more charged to do the inverse, which is unclear there. What else? The next final response that they try to tell us here is that there's a huge amount of time and this presents an opportunity cost for Trump to campaign. Problems with this argument is firstfold. Firstly, we explained to you that campaigning is done through social media and is done through things such as Googling Trump's name. Note that if you go on Google Trends, the amount of people searching Trump now is just more because there's a criminal trial. So we flip this harmony here, because we say more people are searching up Trump, more people interact with his campaigns, more people interact with his questioning of how Biden has handled the economy or why Biden is starting wars. Obviously, you give Trump more social media platform here. That's a good thing. We explained airtime at Zarah. This was a good thing here. And the second thing to explain is the time trade-off where it does exist of physical campaigning. That's to say, when it's campaigning to your rallies who already vote for you, which means that you do this for money, you don't do this for extra votes. So physical campaigning, the time cost was things that you already got money on our side. Unclear that was a harm there. So what do we explain to you here? Firstly, we told you this emboldened his base. It meant people were more likely to donate with him. This was empirically true. It meant he could run more ads, he could get more people handing out flyers, he could expand his reach there. Very clear, certain benefits, and benefits are backed by empirical truth. Secondly, as I said before, the case has genuine legal questions. These were reasons that people will go for him. And also crucially, these were swing voters. These were voters in rural areas where New York City, a 95% Democratic area, did not represent here. Third thing that we explained here is that it meant that Democrats got complacent. It meant that they made everything about Trump and they stopped ignoring Trump's criticisms of them, which resonated with American people. This is rural people in America losing jobs. They want to say that Build Back America generated many jobs. We would point to the fact that the majority of them were in the government sector. Unclear that they also can't come in time for the election here. Second thing that we tell you is that you just simply get Trump more airtime. When someone Googles Trump, when someone hears Trump speak after a trial, they hear his story and they hear very real things about the Biden economy, very bad things there, and also why Biden is helping Gaza there. So the end of this, Trump wins the election. He's more likely to win the election than that. But if you believe that the election was won by Trump on both sides, which empirically it probably is, if you look at polls, we explain that bipartisanship goes down. These were important bills. These are bills that should be passed. We don't want Parliament to be able to hold that. Why does this completely take out their principle here? Firstly, I'll just contest that their principle is not that strong. We point out that not every crime is prosecuted. We give you a clear example of Joe Biden potentially being charged with mishandling classified documents, but people not prosecuting that crime. Unclear that there's actually a principal obligation to prosecute every crime. We point to the fact that not every crime is prosecuted. But secondly, we just say this principal obligation probably gets flipped on them because they're in a world where only one political candidate has had a charge brought about them. But secondly, we just tell you, outside points to very practical harms. It looks like Parliament not being able to have the principled harm to pass policy for the American people. It looks like Trump winning, having principled harms to people, as we tell you at first in the introduction of first. And the reason why these principles outweigh that is these are principles that actually affect people, whereas their principle is just nebulous legal system, right? So at the end of this debate, we show you that more polarization, Trump was more likely to win, principle didn't matter.
The question this affirmative team needed to ask themselves was how far were Republicans and Democrats willing to go to support their only chance at winning this November's election? Because all of Zarah's analysis explains to you why the most diehard Trump supporters would follow him to the grave no matter what, but it does not account for the 90% of the voting base that can critically analyze Trump's policies, that can see past the strongman persona, and can actually engage with the comparative policy debate in American politics. And I would also note, they do not even mention once down the entire bench the name of Alvin Bragg. They do not even mention the actual incentives of Alvin Bragg to win this election for the Democratic Party. They do not engage anywhere near comparatively as they must in their burden in the regret portion of this debate. That is what loses this affirmative team's debate, because they do not actually explain why they have a higher chance or why it's not actually better for the Democratic Party to try and maximize their chance in this election. When Trump does things like blaspheme and have the American flag on the Bible, it sends an incredibly strong message to an incredibly Christian voter base, especially the moderate Christians who remember the days of John McCain, who remember George Bush, who remember Mitt Romney. They remember the moderate Republican days when it was about the economy, not when it was about which party, about the strongman identity. Two clashes. Firstly, which side engages in the legal system in a way that voters can trust? Note this is a different clash to what Jahil mentions. This is a more important clash. Note the fact that without this trial, the confidence in the American public in the legal system was waning exponentially. Which is to say, stuff like repealing Roe v. Wade, stuff like Kyle Rittenhouse getting off scot-free, stuff like the significant injustices to Black Americans without any convictions. This trial and the fact that the judiciary system and the power of trial by jury is powerful enough to convict arguably the most powerful president in American history restores faith in the justice system. You actually feel good as a Democrat when you see that Trump can indeed get convicted. You genuinely have restoration of faith in the justice system. It's unclear to me why this was a principal unjustifiable thing, as Jahil mentions. Even if you believe that Alvin Bragg's case was partisanly motivated and that it had ulterior motives, ultimately, this brought the hammer of justice down on Trump's orange face. And the upshot of this was very, very simple. That meant that the more Democrats who were otherwise getting sick to death of Republicans getting win after win and getting off scot-free after scot-free actually had their confidence restored in justice. That was incredibly important because now, crucially, apolitical people who are now far more likely to view Trump as a felon, and that means they are far less likely to vote for him come November. At our very worst, these apolitical people don't go to the polls, that was good for the Democratic Party. Finally then, that also just means that all of his future policy gets held in huge scrutiny. Now, all of the apolitical people are thinking, well, this guy's a fucking convicted felon, why would I listen to him, right? So it means that there's far less trust in Trump's campaign, and people have far more confidence in the legal system. Jahil misidentifies his clash, he loses this clash. Secondly, let's go on to the next and probably the most debate-winning clash for them, which is which side actually maximized the Democrats' chance of winning this election. The analysis that is critically lacking from Jahil's speech, is that, and their entire bench for that matter, is that this debate is from the perspective of Alvin Bragg, who is a Democratic actor, which is to say, they need to regret the fact that the Democrats would otherwise actually lose or get worse outcomes electorally this November. I think it's very, very clear down our bench why that was not the case. Because the comparative that they engage with is that the malaise in the Democratic Party that otherwise exists in their world means that Biden is doomed otherwise. But I think this just gives Democrats a better chance, gives Democrats a better chance anyway. So material like the stuff that the House can't pass bills is just irrelevant in this debate. It wasn't about, because that was just symmetric on either side anyway, with the trial or without it. Congress is just obviously stuck. So that was unimportant. What was important is how the Democrats tried to maximize their chance to win this election. Let's talk about this by voter stakeholders, noting that this was Affirmative's only path to victory. Let's first talk about the moderate Republican voters, because I think both teams acknowledge that the diehard maggots would probably not change in either world. A lot of the examples that the AF team gives you are just mitigation in the eyes of the American public, which is to say, January 6th has lots of plausible deniability amongst the American voter base. A lot of people view January 6th, well, oh look, it wasn't Trump that did the riots, so technically it wasn't Trump's fault. The same can be said for Trump's comments as well about like the really sexist comments he makes, as Liv points out. There was a lot of plausible deniability to that, and crucially, it did not get the airtime that this trial has. That was very important because this trial was literally world news for 2 months straight. It was headlines of every single news website. Because that means the entirety of the American voter base knows about it. Every Republican knows about it. They know that Trump cheated on his wife. That is proven in the court of law. They know that Trump is sleeping in court and wearing diapers. And they know that Trump is literally violating gag orders and says incredibly outlandish and nonsensical things on Truth Social. This was particularly damning for them because they do not explain why the moderate Republicans who were significantly embittered by the current state of the Republican Party, actually vote to it, noting the fact that that was a majority of the Republican Party. They see Donald Trump's ideology as contrary to the grand old party. They see Trump as contrary to Christianity when he cheats on his wife. They see Trump contrary to the policies of Mitt Romney, George Bush, and that means it was far, far worse in the eyes of Republicans. That means then that it was far more likely that moderate Republicans would just not go to the polls this November. That was particularly devastating for this other team's case because we can prove why we take out a significant chunk of Trump's otherwise would-be voter base. That was good for us. Next, let's talk about the next stakeholder, which was swing voters and apolitical people. Because when people who are on the fence about voting in November see literally for weeks straight testimony of how Trump groped women and cheated on his wife and literally did things like violate gag orders and pay lots of hush money, they see Trump as incredibly morally bankrupt. Knowing the fact that apolitical people and swing voters are otherwise quite uninformed on the nature of policy, they are not very convinced by the ideas of the economy, especially since this was symmetric on both parties. Both parties try to push for the economy. They aren't convinced by that. What they are convinced by is significant rhetoric about Trump cheating on his wife, Trump literally violating the gag orders, literally trying to break the principles of democracy itself. They dislike Trump because Trump is actively anti-American. Trump is actively trying to harm the tenets of democracy. Maybe they perceive Biden as old, but literally anyone would take an old person over a person who's trying to break the system itself. At the end of this, that means at the polls, swing voters are far, far more likely to turn up. They're far, far more likely to vote for Biden. This was devastating because that means we get a significant portion of the voting base of America on our side. They are not able to get that on our side. We maximize the Democrats' chance. Finally, on the last demographic, this is the most important one. It's the Democrats, and specifically the jaded Democrats. The Democrats who are just pissed off at Biden because Biden isn't doing what they want him to. Because the left wing literally sees Biden's failures in Gaza as a reason not to go to the polls. That was particularly pernicious for the Democrats otherwise. They know they're cooked at the election otherwise because it means that if their majority of their voting base doesn't rock up in November, they're actually fucked. When you have this trial, it serves as a significant distraction, and Truthfully, it's a bit of a wake-up call for most Democrats who are jaded, because they then realize, oh, well, look, maybe Biden doesn't do everything the way I want him to do, or want him to do it. But Trump is just the far, far worse alternative. Trump is trying to break the system of democracy itself. Trump is literally trying to destroy my life as a gay person. Trump is literally trying to take my rights away as a feminist. Trump is literally trying to destroy me as the democracy itself. This trial provides an escape route for these voters to actually believe in the fact that Biden is a better alternative. They rock up to the polls. They actually try and get Democrats to win the election. At the end of this, because Alvin Bragg had the incentive to actually make Biden win the election, that was the comparative they needed to engage with. We won this debate.
Cool. Okay. Firstly on swing voters, secondly on polarized voters, and thirdly on policy, which we tell you is largely symmetric anyway. So firstly on swing voters, we proved to you down the bench a couple of things. Firstly, that the fact that this trial is legitimate is likely to be believed because it's firstly just in line with Trump's character and everything we've heard about him throughout most of his time in the public eye, but also it's just a pretty black and white kind of, did he do a thing, was there a paper trail, but also that this was just unanimously voted by a jury, by members of a jury, and he has been convicted. So therefore, it's just likely to be believed by the average person that this was not a thing. Granted that the average person does care and about the justice system and does value it as a pretty legitimate thing, but also that this trial has significant implications on how we view Donald Trump as a person, because firstly, he's just the first president to be convicted of a crime. Secondly, because he might be actually serving a presidency in jail, even though we tell you the fact that he'd serve a presidency is unlikely, but also because it is a pretty serious sex scandal, which is something that's particularly valuable to the American public, who's generally a conservative group of people and cares about things like family and things like loyalty and chastity. Maybe not chastity, but I want you in that kind of respect. Noting also here that these people are likely to care just about the principle of it, in terms of how the American public views the trial, and that it is a democratic system that has been proven to hold people accountable, even people in power, even people who've been previously thought of as untouchable, in the same way that it holds the average person accountable. And we think that to the American public this is particularly important, but also does things restores their faith in the justice system and in democracy as a whole. And that is particularly meaningful for them when they come out to vote, because they are less disillusioned with the whole thing in the first place. So because of those two things, we tell you that swing voters are more likely to vote against Trump because of generally conservative beliefs. Noting that this is particularly impactful in swing states, which are pretty Catholic, Baptist Catholic in that respect, and therefore this is likely to be extremely meaningful. But also, more importantly, that newer voters who previously didn't care about politics because of the media attention and because of the large public discourse that this has created, now just have a new reason to vote, because they've seen the press of the case and they oppose it on things like moral grounds, in a way that has previously been seen to hurt Trump in the past, in a way that we've proved to you down the bench is particularly successful in preventing him from getting the vote. Noting that the standards of the American public. So we tell you at the end of this that on our side we are more likely to galvanize swing voters and people who previously would not vote. But also we say that polarized voters work better on our side as well, because we tell you first of all that just as much as Republicans can radicalize to the cause, Democrats can too, in that they have a new reason to radicalize against Trump because they see him as a threat to democracy, and they have a new way of galvanizing support because he's just been convicted, and we've proved that this is particularly legitimate. But we also tell you, to no response down the affirmative bench, that radicalized voters are particularly good for our side, because it just disincentivizes more moderate Republicans to kind of not vote or turn more Democrat, because they see the more radical side of the Republicans and do not agree with it, and are likely to be less sympathetic to those kinds of people because they look particularly outlandish and outcry, and like they are supporting things that traditionally Christian populations would previously not. Noting that these people probably don't want to see a convicted felon be the president, and noting that these people probably don't want to see someone who's cheated on their wife be the president. Finally, on policy, we just say that most of this is symmetric. We've proved this the third. Proud to negate.